हमारी चेतना घुल कर तुम में दिव्य हो जाए माता। हमारी चेतना घुल कर तुम में दिव्य हो जाए माता। हम उस डगर पे चले निरंतर, हम उस डगर पे चले निरंतर, जो तुम तक पहुँचाता माता, जो तुम तक पहुँचाता। हमारी चेतना घुल कर तुम में दिव्य हो जाए माता। हृदय में हो प्रबल अभिप्सा, बस जुड़ना है तुम ही से माँ। हृदय में हो प्रबल अभिप्सा, बस जुड़ना है तुमसे ही माँ। मायावी इच्छाएं हमें भटकाएं, मायावी इच्छाएं हमें भटकाएं, हमें मुक्ति देना उनसे माँ। हमारी चेतना घुल कर तुम में दिव्य हो जाए माता। हम उस डगर पे चले निरंतर, हम उस डगर पे चले निरंतर, जो तुम तक पहुँचाता माता, जो तुम तक पहुँचाता। हमारी चेतना घुल कर तुम में दिव्य हो जाए माता, दिव्य हो जाए माता।
Namaste, my dear brothers and sisters. The love and blessings of the Mother and Sri Aurobindo to all of you from Sri Aurobindo Ashram, Delhi branch. This song is Hamari Chetna Ghulkar Tum Mein Divya Ho Jaye Mata. This song is a prayer to the Mother. It's an ardent request that let my consciousness dissolve in yours. And to some extent, it also suggests how it can happen. Let me always be on the path that leads to you. So let me find that path, walk that path, so that my consciousness merges with yours. In fact, the entire spiritual journey is about consciousness, about elevation of consciousness, about achieving an identity with the divine consciousness. Because the way we live determines how our consciousness gets affected. So if we walk the path that leads us towards our consciousness merging with the divine consciousness, it culminates in our thinking and feeling the way the divine does, what the Gita calls manmana bhava, be my-minded. And the type of mind that we develop, the type of consciousness that we develop in turn determines what type of nature, habitual nature we have. What is it that we would, as a habit, spontaneously think and feel and do. And in fact, that is the key not only to spiritual progress and reaching that peak when our consciousness would merge with the divine consciousness, so that we would be constantly aware of it throughout the day and night, so that all our thoughts, feelings, and actions reflect that divine consciousness. Not only it is just leading to that change in consciousness, it also has beautiful byproducts. Byproducts such as always staying in a state of peace and experiencing a sense of fulfillment. That is a feeling that I want nothing because I have everything. And that feeling of peace and fulfillment is something that we all are looking for. But at the same time, it doesn't come by going in search of it. Just walk the spiritual path. The consciousness starts merging and more with the divine consciousness, and finally culminates in the consciousness becoming one with the divine consciousness. And we find that as a result, these byproducts have been there, but all the same, that's not what we started with as the goal. Now, today's session is in this third module of the series of courses on the yoga, the third class. And I do hope it doesn't end up being a third class class. The title is Health and Disease. We'll try to understand the concept of health and disease, just get introduced to it. We consider disease to be the opposite of health. And that is one way of looking at it. But if you go into the word disease itself, it is dis plus ease. That is not feeling easy. Now, feeling easy is something rather enigmatic. There is a humorous but a very meaningful sentence that Sidney Smith once said. He said, I have gout, asthma, and 7 other maladies, but otherwise I'm quite all right. So the number of diseases one has doesn't necessarily mean that the person will be not at ease. Person can have a number of diseases and yet be at ease. On the other hand, doctors also find patients who come to them with many complaints, but then all examination and investigation turns out to be negative. And the doctor tells him there's nothing wrong with you. But the fact is something is wrong, because so long as the patient is miserable, there is something wrong with the patient. But all the same, the doctor can't easily pinpoint, and very often in such cases, it is some underlying psychological distress which is giving physical symptoms. So the person is not at ease, although the person really has no major, significant, or demonstrable physical problem. But the symptoms are all the same physical. So that can also happen. So disease is something enigmatic, because it's just basically feeling not at ease. But all the same, there are some diseases which are very obvious. For example, if a person has fever, 102 degrees Fahrenheit, then the person may be able to put himself at ease. But all the same, there is a disease which has to be taken care of. His being at ease helps in recovery, but all the same, there is a disease that is there. So with this little introduction, let's go to the digital board. The other day, we were talking about the fact that we basically evolved from the organisms which came first on Earth, and these organisms were made up of just one cell, and the cell could perform all the functions such as ingestion of food and so this organism could ingest food, use this food with the help of oxygen which was dissolved in the surrounding water to get energy, and it could dump its waste products into its surroundings, waste products such as carbon dioxide and ammonia. And in that vast sea or ocean, this little amoeba taking a little of food and oxygen or dumping a little of carbon dioxide or ammonia did not make much difference. And the surroundings were also wet, warm, and salty. So it is under these conditions that life evolved, and we continue to need the same sort of conditions for each cell in our body to be able to stay alive. However, we don't live in the sea, we live on land, and our body is made up of not one, but trillions of cells. And this basic requirement of every cell of the body to have a bit of fluid around us, which is wet, warm, and salty, and can take care of the basic requirements for life, has been met by having a division of labor. There are some parts of the body which specialize in providing the nourishment in this little private pond which each cell has, and some make oxygen available in this, and some organs get rid of the waste products like carbon dioxide or ammonia, so that these cells continue to get the type of conditions under which they can live. And then, of course, there are mechanisms for maintaining also the warmth and saltiness of this fluid around at a constant level. Now, the fact that this remains constant has been called by Claude Bernard the constancy of the internal environment, and by Walter Cannon a few decades later, homeostasis. This environment is called, this internal environment is called internal because it is within the body. And it is called environment because it surrounds the cells, it forms the environment of the cells. And homeostasis is homeo same and stasis condition. So the same type of condition is maintained. So that's why it's called homeostasis. Now with this, let's now see how is it that this constancy is maintained. It's maintained by a mechanism similar to that you observe in an electric iron. You set it for, say, a particular type of fabric, say cotton or silk, and that needs a certain temperature. More than that will burn that fabric. So when you have that setting, as soon as the temperature goes a little above that temperature, the set temperature above which the fabric might burn, the electric iron switches itself off. And as a result, it starts cooling. As soon as the temperature falls a little below that, which you want, it switches itself on again. So that is the type of mechanism that we have in the body also for keeping this internal environment constant, which means that there is a certain variable which has to be kept constant. Now, where the variable could be blood glucose, or it could be the body temperature, but it is this variable that has to be kept at a constant level. And to be able to keep it at a constant level, we need a mechanism for sensing how much it is right now. And this becomes particularly important when this variable is altered, or there is a threat that it may be altered because of a disturbance. And these disturbances are rather common in the body. So this disturbance disturbs the variable, and the news about this disturbance is fed to certain structures which have specialized in sensing this change. And this is the feedback. This feedback is about the current value of the variable. That is, how much is it right now? How much is the blood sugar? What is the temperature right now? And this disturbance might have changed it to a level which is not that we really want. We want the level to stay constant, which is optimum for cellular function. This disturbance has altered it. It is no longer what we actually want. Now, this is the feedback that is provided to a processing unit. Now, what the processing unit does is to take into account the set point for that particular variable. So in case of body temperature, it is 37 degrees centigrade. So the processing unit takes into account that set point, and it takes into account also the feedback. So these are the two types of inputs that it is getting. And what it does is to find out the difference between the set point and the current value of the variable, which is being fed from this feedback. So it finds out the difference between the current value and the set point. And the difference is called the error. So this is the error. Now this processing unit also has mechanisms for deciding that if this is the type of error, which variable has been affected, then what are the places in the body which need to alter their activity so that this error can be corrected. And this is then fed, that is the output of this processing unit, to the effector organs. So this is the control variable, which has a certain set point in the body. And if there's a disturbance, the current value is fed to a processing unit, which takes into account the feedback as well as the set point, finds out the error, and then determines which are the parts of the body which need to alter their activity so that the variable can be brought back towards the desired value or the set point. Something like the electric iron, you have a certain point that you want, that is the set point. As soon as the temperature falls below that, the action taken is that the iron switches itself on, and if the temperature is higher than we want, the action taken is that it switches itself on again. So if the temperature has fallen, switches on, temperature is higher, it switches itself off. So that's how it goes on. And there is obviously some sort of a simple processing unit within the electric iron that is doing that, monitoring the temperature and comparing it with the set point, and then taking appropriate action in terms of the iron getting switched on or off. Now let's assume that the blood pressure is the blood level of glucose. So the variable is blood glucose. And how can it be disturbed? By eating or starving. So let's say the person has just eaten a meal, a large amount of glucose has been transferred from the intestines to the blood glucose has gone up, and this has been sensed, and then it has processed, and the processing, which is there both in the pancreas and in the central nervous system, the effect is that insulin is secreted. And insulin has the effect of bringing down the blood glucose. And when it has, as a result of the action of insulin, the blood glucose has fallen. And then if it falls a little below the desirable level, the same mechanism will now feed back this new information to the processing unit. The result will be insulin secretion will be switched off. When it is switched off, the glucose, instead of going down, will stay at that level. And in contrast, some other hormones which can raise blood glucose may be secreted. And the result is that the blood glucose is maintained at the normal level. Now, let's take another example. Say the variable affected is temperature. The control variable is the temperature. Now, in case of temperature, the range required is much narrower than in case of glucose. In case of glucose, anything between say 70 or 80 milligrams percent up to about 150 milligrams percent is normal, depending upon whether it has just eaten a meal or one has took a meal 4 hours ago or 6 hours ago. So all that is quite compatible. And if blood glucose falls even to 60 or rises to a level of 200, the existence of the person is not threatened. But in case of temperature, the range is rather narrow. And the disturbances can be wide, because one can be at a place which is at a freezing temperature, as in the hills, or one could be at a place where the temperature is 50 degrees centigrade, as in a desert. And in this type of a situation, the body resorts to, particularly in case of low temperatures, when the environmental temperature is low, the body resorts to what is called anticipatory control. Now, the blood temperature that has to be controlled is the temperature of the internal environment. That is the fluid surrounding the cells. Now, that is in close equilibrium with the blood, because it is the blood flowing in the capillaries which leads to that exchange, which provides with the fluid immediately surrounding the cells. So for all practical purposes, the blood is more or less has the same type of characteristics as the fluid surrounding the cells, immediately around the cells. And therefore, the temperature to be regulated is the temperature of the blood. And there is a part in the brain, the hypothalamus, which senses the blood temperature. But then suppose a person has gone to a place where the temperature around is freezing. If we wait for the temperature to fall to 36 or 35 from 37, then the correction that is applied might take some time to take its effect. And in the meantime, the temperature may fall so much that the person becomes very inactive. Or in case of heat, it may threaten the very existence itself. Low temperature doesn't kill, but makes the person extremely inactive. And in case of people who have been exposed to, say, freezing temperature for a very long time and could not regulate the body temperature, the person becomes stiff and cold. But so for all practical purposes, the person looks dead, but actually the person is not dead. And when this person is rewarmed, the person can come alive. And therefore, the dictum in such cases, suppose somebody went to a mountain and there he was exposed to this, and he's found that after a few hours or overnight, he stays there, and then he's brought back in this stiff condition when the heart has stopped beating, and we feel for all practical purposes, the person seems to be dead. But then in such a situation, we don't declare the person dead unless he's dead and warm. So dead and cold is not the same as dying. So it's dead and warm. But at the same time, we don't want that sort of a thing to happen as a routine. And therefore, what nature has done is that the action is taken in anticipation that such a thing might happen. Now, how can that be? Because we can't wait for the temperature of the blood itself to fall and this part of the brain to sense it. So what happens in this case is that the skin itself provides the feedback, because the skin is exposed immediately to that temperature, and there are temperature receptors in the skin. That is how we can feel when we touch something, whether it is cold or hot. And these skin receptors also provide the feedback, and they provide the feedback naturally much before the blood temperature has fallen. So the skin temperature receptors start providing this feedback to the brain, and the result is action, which increases heat conservation and increases heat production. So heat conservation is increased, or heat loss is decreased by constricting the blood vessels in the skin, because if the skin gets very little blood flow, it doesn't remain warm. And if it is cold skin, that cold skin will not lose much heat to the surroundings. And that's how this cold skin now protects the person. So blood flow has fallen. The skin being cold doesn't matter. What matters is the temperature of the blood. So heat loss has been reduced. Heat is conserved. Extra heat is also produced by shivering. The person starts shivering. So this apparently useless muscular activity generates heat. So the result is that the temperature is maintained as a result of this. So the person shivers. But suppose the person is exposed to a place where the temperature is high. Again, before the blood temperature has really gone up significantly, this is fed by the receptor of the skin, the blood temperature might also in such situations go up a little bit, and the result is action is taken to increase heat loss from the body. And this happens as a result of the blood vessels in the skin, that is the blood flow to the skin increasing, the blood vessels open up, and the skin becomes warm, and this warm skin now starts losing heat to the surroundings. But more important than that, as soon as the temperature has gone beyond a certain point, we find that another action taken is that the person starts sweating. So information is conveyed to the sweat glands, and the result is that skin becomes wet, and this water from the wet skin evaporates, and in the process of evaporating or drying up, it needs heat. To dry up water, we need heat. So to dry up water from the surface of the skin, also we need heat. Where does this heat come from? From the body. So the body loses heat as the sweat dries up. And that's how, by losing heat, the person's body temperature starts coming down, which means that it is maintained in spite of the tendency for it to rise because the surrounding temperature is high. Now let's look at how we can understand the process of fever in this light. Now, normally the set point is 37 degrees. As a result of an infection, the person's set point has now gone to, say, 40 degrees centigrade. So from 37, which is normal, it has gone to 40. So the infection has raised the set point to 40, but the temperature of the blood is still 37. So how will this feedback that the body temperature is 37 and the brain comparing it to the set point, how will it respond? It will respond as if it is cold, because compared to the set temperature 40, 37 is also cold. And therefore, what happens is the person starts shivering. As a result of the shivering, the temperature starts going up. And that's why in the early phases of the fever, the person may say, I'm feeling extremely cold, give me a blanket. Even if it is the month of June, it's peak summer, and the person asks for a blanket. Because because the body mechanisms are behaving as if it is cold. It is cold because 37 is cold as compared to this new set point because of the infection. So the person shivers. After some time, the temperature has risen to 40. Now the set point is the same as the body temperature. The person stops shivering. After a few days, the infection gets all right, generally as a result of the defense mechanisms of the body itself. The immune system takes care of the infection is gone. The set point is once again brought back to 37. But the person's body temperature has still not come down. His blood temperature has still not come down. The set point has been reset because now the infection is gone. But the body temperature is still above that. So now how will the processing unit behave? As if it is now hot, because the temperature of the body is hot as compared to the set point of 37. And therefore, how does the person respond? The person responds by sweating. And that's why we find that when the person is recovering from fever, the person actually starts sweating. When the temperature has come down to the normal temperature, 37, the sweating stops. So you find that disease is nothing but a deviation from normal, and we can understand it in terms of the mechanisms which operate in health. The same mechanisms come into play to take care of disease, and therefore really you can't separate the understanding of health from disease. Now with this, I'll stop here this sharing, and now we'll share some slides. Thank you. So topic is Introduction to Health Sciences. These courses are a part of the celebrations of the 150th anniversary of Sri Aurobindo and the 75th year of India's independence. Let me start with this quotation by Oliver Wendell Holmes, who was a physician who practiced on the east coast of the United States in the Boston area. But apart from being a doctor, he was also a man of literature. So this is from one of his poems. Not in the world of light alone, where God has built his blazing throne, nor yet alone in earth below, with belted seas that come and go, and endless isles of sunlight green, is all thy Maker's glory seen. Looking upon thy wondrous frame, eternal wisdom still the same. Now we tend to see the divine or God in certain situations. And in the first two lines, he gives one such thing that in our own imagination is where God is, not in the world of light alone, that is a world which is full of light, very different from our world of light and darkness. Light and darkness could mean knowledge and ignorance. That world which is full of just knowledge, the total truth, where God has built his blazing throne. So somewhere high up in the heavens, he has built his throne, and that is a world of light in quite a contrast with the type of world in which we live. And that is where we imagine God is. But we also get an experience of the divine on this earth, not yet alone in earth below, with belted seas that come and go. So we think of the bottom of the sea. When we look at the surface of the sea or the ocean, that itself can be a very spiritually uplifting experience. And then we imagine that perhaps God is somewhere in the earth below at the bottom. And when we look at vast expanses of greenery and endless isles of sunlit green, again, that gives us an experience of the divine. It gives us, makes us, it's like a spiritual experience. You can see that, oh, this vast expanse of green is what the divine is like. Here is beauty that has not yet been spoilt by man. Whether it is a vast expanse of green, or it is snow-clad mountains, or a beautiful sunrise or sunset, all these can give us an image, a glimpse of the divine. So we see the divine in the somewhere high up in the heavens, or at the bottom of the sea, or in this type of sceneries, greenery, the snow-clad mountains, etc. But these are not the only places where the Maker's glory is seen, the glory of the divine. Looking upon thy wondrous frame, look at your own body, the frame, your bodily frame. Looking upon thy wondrous frame, eternal wisdom still the same. Even this, just looking at yourself, your bodily frame, will also give you a glimpse of that same eternal wisdom which you find at other places. And that eternal, infinite wisdom is something which is packed into your wonderful frame, into this beautiful machine, the human machine, which is much more than a machine, which is an expression of this eternal wisdom, a partial expression of it, but an expression of the same eternal wisdom, which you visualize somewhere high up in the sky, at the bottom of the sea, or in a vast expanse of green. Not in the world of light alone, where God has built his blazing throne, nor yet alone in earth below, with belted seas that come and go, and endless isles of sunlit green, is all thy Maker's glory seen. Looking upon thy wondrous frame, eternal wisdom still the same. This term, constancy of the internal environment, in French, the milieu interior, milieu is environment and interior is internal. So constancy of the internal environment was coined by Claude Bernard, who was a 19th century physiologist. And those days, there was hardly any distinction between a physiologist and a physician. And he has written a beautiful book, An Introduction to the Study of Experimental Medicine, which, apart from saying something about the internal environment, also tells a lot about the very process of research. So he was also a man of literature. It's a beautifully written book, and English translations are available. And a few decades later, an American physiologist, Walter Cannon, coined the term homeostasis, and his best known book is The Wisdom of the Body, where again, you can see he has talked about that eternal wisdom packed into this finite body, infinite wisdom in the finite body. But then he was also a man of literature, apart from being a physiologist. He has written several other books, and including one which again gives us a very good idea of the very process of research in an interesting way, with laced with a lot of anecdotes, etc. It reads like a novel, and that is The Way of an Investigator. That's another beautiful book by Walter Cannon. Now, let's turn to the concept of health and disease. So that was an introduction to the introduction to health sciences. And we have already exhausted about half an hour. So what are health and disease? Now, looked at in terms of what we have been talking since the morning today and in some previous classes, health is homeostasis, that is maintaining this constancy of the internal environment. That is the environment which is inside the body, but outside the cells, surrounding the cells, that remains constant in terms of its temperature and warmth and wetness and saltiness, and has a good supply available of food and oxygen, and into which waste products can be dumped, but they don't accumulate. So that is homeostasis. So the opposite of that, that is derangement of homeostasis, is what would lead to disease. So this is one way of looking at the process of health and disease. Now, when would homeostasis be deranged? We have seen that the body has control mechanisms which maintain homeostasis in spite of challenges, which means we have a certain capacity to respond to these challenges, both from outside, like say the body temperature or the temperature of our surroundings, or challenge like germs which are outside, but then they enter the body. And then we have challenges within the body, like the blood glucose going up after a meal. So as we have the capacity to respond to all these challenges, and we tend to take the controlled variable towards normal. This process is called a negative feedback mechanism. It's called negative feedback because the response is negative to the disturbance. It's negative to the type of change that has taken place. So if the blood glucose has gone up, the feedback is that the blood glucose has gone up. The response is to bring the blood glucose down. So the response of the body is opposite or negative to the disturbance. So it's called the negative feedback mechanism. Do we also have a positive feedback mechanism? That would be disastrous. If the blood glucose has gone up and the mechanism raises it further, it would be disastrous. But there are a few selected situations where we do have a positive feedback mechanism also. So the body is extremely wise. It knows what to do where. And I'm feeling tempted to give you that example quickly. And that example comes in the reproductive system. When a child has to be delivered and the pregnant woman is near the point of delivery, the uterus is stretched, and the stretch leads to contraction of the uterus. This contraction tends to push the baby out. Now, as the baby goes out, as a result of this contraction itself feeds back to a further contraction, because as a result of the contraction, the stretch has increased, and it does not lead to the feedback of now reducing the stretch. Now the feedback results in increasing the stretch, increasing the contraction. So the baby keeps getting pushed down. So that is where it is really required. We'll come to it again when we talk about the female reproductive system. But you can see that the body is really wonderfully made. But most of the time, for all practical purposes, it's a negative feedback mechanism that generates that is sort of the response of the body to a challenge, like a high temperature, or the increase in the blood glucose, or say fall in the air pressure at high altitude. So in all these situations, we have a negative feedback mechanism available. So the homeostasis would be deranged when the challenge overwhelms the capacity to respond. The challenge is too big for the capacity to respond. Now, this also gives us now a way of looking at why some people tend to fall ill more often than others. Because a certain challenge, which a healthy person can easily respond to without any derangement of homeostasis, may turn out to be too much of a challenge for a weak person. So it's basically an imbalance between the challenge and the capacity to respond. So-called average healthy person is able to respond to a particular challenge, a certain magnitude of the challenge, with a response that, say, if this is the challenge and this is the response, the two are well matched. But if the challenge becomes, say, this much, then he can't increase the response to that extent. The response can't match this challenge. So the person, its capacity to respond is overwhelmed and he falls sick. But then there could be a situation in which this person is extremely strong, and therefore when the challenge is this much, he is healthy. If the challenge is this much, he still remains healthy. And there could be a very weak person whose capacity to respond is even less than that of the average person, and therefore the challenge which an average person could handle very easily and not fall sick, this weak person can fall sick. So it means that we have an entire range of health which depends primarily on our capacity to respond to a challenge. And an average healthy person responds to a certain magnitude of the challenge in such a way as to remain healthy. He remains blissfully unaware of the disturbance that has been created by this challenge, and he remains healthy. So to take one simple example, that of diabetes. Now, when we eat, the blood glucose goes up, and the pancreas responds by secreting insulin. Now, a person's pancreas has become weak. His capacity to secrete insulin has gone down. Now, the same type of meal which keeps the blood glucose within normal, the same type of a meal after which a healthy person's blood glucose remains normal, in case of this person who can't respond with the same amount of insulin secretion, will lead to an increase in the blood glucose. So we declare the person as diabetic. This person has diabetes. But suppose this person takes a meal which does not push the blood glucose to the same level, which can be done either by altering the composition of the diet, having more of dietary fiber, for example, in it, or it can be done by having a smaller meal. The size of the meal is reduced. So the blood glucose does not go up to the same level. Now, whatever little capacity for secreting insulin he has is enough. And the result is that after this meal, his blood glucose still stays normal. And we say that, well, even after having a meal, his blood glucose is normal. So he can shift from the diabetic category to the normal category just by altering the nature of the meal and the quantity of the meal. So you can understand that essentially there's no hard and fast dividing line between health and disease. It's basically a balance between the challenge and the capacity to respond. So long as the capacity to respond is adequate for handling the challenge, the person stays in good health. When the capacity to respond is overwhelmed by the challenge, which can happen either because the challenge is too big or because the capacity has gone down, the person falls sick. Now let's take one more example, that of cancer. Now in the body, the cells at most places in the body keep dying, and they keep getting replaced by new cells of the same type. See, this is the type of cells which we have in the skin at the depth, and on the surface, we have cells which are rather thin and flat. So these are at the base tall cells which multiply, and at the surface, we have these thin cells which do not multiply. They are essentially dead cells, almost dying, and then they are shed. And you can get a sample of these shed cells. If you rub your skin hard with a towel after a bath, you find that the towel gets blackish. That becomes blackish because some of these surface cells have got transferred to the towel. So that is what makes it blackish looking. So these cells are being shed continually, whether or not you rub your skin with the towel. In any case, it keeps happening. And but we don't notice it because these cells multiply and keep rising to the surface, and the surface still remains essentially the same, and we don't even know it because the number of cells lost is equal to the number of cells that are replaced, and the type of cells that are produced are exactly the same type that are lost. So this is a finely regulated mechanism. Something can go wrong with this mechanism, and often what it does, the number of cells that are formed are much more than the number of cells being lost, and these cells are not of the same type as those which have been lost. These are undifferentiated cells. So these undifferentiated cells are also the ones which multiply very fast, but then they don't seem to belong to the body. And whatever does not belong to the body comes within the province of the immune system of the body. The immune system, eliminates the germs because the germs are treated as foreign. These cells don't seem to belong to the body. They are also treated as foreign, and the immune cells eliminate them. So once in a while, this disturbance in the cell cycle, as it is called, keeps taking place in all of us, which means we are developing a small little tumor from time to time in different parts of the body, but we remain blissfully unaware of it because the immune cells are taking care of that, and the tumor is eliminated while it is still very small. But then suppose the immune system becomes weak, and one of the things that weakens the immune system is mental stress. So if the immune system becomes weak, this type of a process, when it happens somewhere in the body, may become too much for the immune system to handle because the immune system is now weakened, and the tumor gets an opportunity to grow bigger. And as it gets bigger, it is now, in any case, too big for the immune system to take care of it. And the person comes down with cancer. And in fact, there is a remarkable relationship between a person undergoing major psychological trauma and cancer. Quite often, it is within a few years of a major trauma that a person experiences that the person comes down with cancer. Now, if the person's immune system has been overwhelmed, the tumor has developed, but still it has an early stage, then what can we do? What we can do is twofold. One is remove this tumor surgically. Now, the result is that the tumor load has come down. The number of cancer cells in the body has been brought down drastically by surgery. But then no surgeon can remove the last cancer cell from the body. Some will be still left behind. But then these cells which are left behind may be within the capacity of the immune system to take care of, which means the second thing that we have to do is to strengthen the immune system of the person. And with that, we find that these remaining cancer cells, which the surgeon could not eliminate, get eliminated by the immune system. And these are the situations in which one gets a miracle cure from cancer. So firstly, the cancer has to be at an early stage. Secondly, the immune system has to be strong. And for the immune system to be strong, you can understand the most important condition is mental peace. And to be at mental peace, in spite of the diagnosis of cancer, does not come easily to many people. And that is why there are only some exceptional people who are able to do it on their own, adopt a type of attitude which keeps them at peace in spite of the cancer. And these are the people who overcome cancer. And Bernie Siegel, the cancer surgeon, has called these people exceptional patients. But then he says that patients may be exceptional, but they are patients who can teach us something. There's a certain type of attitude that comes to them naturally. What is that attitude? They don't get too upset by the diagnosis. They say, well, it is only an advance notice. In any case, one has to die one day. I received advance notice. So in the few years that I have, let me try to do all those things which I wanted to do so far. They make a wish list and start going about those things. Still better, they feel that I have only a short period to live. So let me start making amends. If they hurt somebody, they start apologizing to that person. If somebody hurt them, they contact that person and tell them all is forgotten. I have forgiven you. And people also know this person has cancer, so they become nice to him. He doesn't have long to live. And the result is that during this period, their attention is focused neither on themselves nor on the disease. Their attention, in fact, starts looking out, reaching out. They become more loving, caring, and sharing. These are the people who can achieve this sort of a miracle. And not only the remainder of their life becomes meaningful, the remainder itself becomes longer. Now, Bernie Siegel said that if this is what is happening to some exceptional people, it comes to them naturally. Can this type of an attitude be induced in some other people by appropriate counseling? And he found that particularly in a desperate situation like cancer, people can change, although attitudes are difficult to change, they can change. And the more they change, the more they can benefit from this. So that's how we can understand cancer, again, as a deviation from normal. Normally there's a cell cycle. The cell cycle is deranged. It's deranged in just about everybody once in a while, but then it is being taken care of by the immune cells. And therefore, we don't come to know that we developed a tumor anywhere. But when the immune system becomes weak, the person develops a full-blown tumor. and it may be beyond the capacity of even a healthy immune system to now take care of it. So we can bring down the tumor load drastically by surgery, and the few cells that are remaining can be taken care of if the immune system of the person is strong. So that same mechanism which eliminates these small incipient, that is those which are just beginning, these small little tumors which are forming in all of us all the time, can also, the same mechanism can also be used for taking care of those residual cells which are left behind in a cancer patient after surgery. So we can see that the key to staying healthy is twofold: improve the capacity of the body to meet challenges and minimize the extent to which the body is challenged. Now let's look at both these one by one. One can improve the capacity of the body to meet challenges through a variety of approaches. Nutrition, that is eating the right type of food in the right quantity in the right way. All the three are important. What we eat, how much we eat, and how we eat. And we have talked about this in great detail in the previous module, yes.02. Then, just as it is important to put into the body the right type of food, it is also important not to put into the body anything that can be harmful, like tobacco or alcohol. So no harmful substances to be introduced into the body. The third is moderate amount of regular physical activity, and yogic practices are far better than many other common exercises, but any type of exercise is better than no exercise at all. Again, what those yogic practices are, how they can be done, and why they are better than ordinary sports, games and sports, that also again we have talked in the previous modules, particularly yes.01. And sleep, again, like food, when we sleep, how long we sleep, and how we sleep, all are important. And we will have some occasion to talk about sleep in greater detail in this module, and again in the next module, yes.04, when we talk about lifestyle diseases. So in fact, chronic sleep deprivation, that is people voluntarily giving up the amount of sleep that they are taking. So chronic voluntary sleep deprivation is emerging as a major risk factor for lifestyle diseases. And one of the manifestations of this inadequate, poor quality sleep is the decline in the function of the immune system. And then last but not least, being mentally at peace improves the capacity of the body to meet challenges. And this is something which is more difficult to achieve and also underestimated in its importance. We tend to give far greater importance to things like food, smoking, drinking, exercise, and even sleep. But we feel mental peace, well, that is also one of the factors. But we don't realize that that, in fact, is the most important factor that influences our immune system. It, in fact, can override the effect of a few adverse physical factors. Because when it comes to physical factors, we are all making mistakes. Sometimes because of ignorance, we don't know what is the best way to eat. We don't know what type of exercise will be best for us. We may not have time for eating well or exercising. So we are all making mistakes either because of ignorance or because of the compulsions of daily life, which make it difficult for us to even do what we know, to put into practice what we know about eating and exercise and so on, and even sleep. We know we should be sleeping the right amount, but then when there is so much work to do and there's so much of keeping up with the social contacts and so on, and the result is that we voluntarily give up sleep. So in comes to physical factors, we may be making mistakes, but to a large extent, it can be compensated by if the person is mentally at peace. Doesn't mean that we should not take care of the physical factors. That should be done to the extent possible. But then we should not neglect mental peace as a minor factor. The second prong of the prevention of disease or staying healthy, minimize the extent to which the body is challenged. Firstly, minimize the entry of harmful substances, like say germs. So don't be in an environment where there are plenty of germs. Naturally, one can't go very close to a patient and expose oneself when the person is coughing. That would be inviting a respiratory infection. One may not fall sick if the capacity to meet the challenge is good, as happened in case of the COVID. Everybody did not get COVID, but all the same, we did try to use masks so that when a person speaks or coughs, it doesn't straight away go to the person who is sitting in front of you. So minimize the entry of harmful substances like germs, or the pollutants. So reduce environmental pollution. So minimize the entry of harmful, or in case of a person who has allergy to pollen grains, avoid the entry of pollen grains into the body, into the nose. So minimize the entry of harmful substances. Secondly, avoid overuse of any part of the body, like say trying to carry 100 kg weight on the back. Now that is an obvious overuse of the back. The back is not designed to carry that sort of a heavy load. Avoid misuse. For example, excessive screen time, that is misuse of the eyes. Trying to read in very dim light, that is a misuse of the eyes. Trying to read in a poor posture, that is misuse of the eyes. So avoid overuse and misuse of any part of the body, and avoid abuse of any part of the body. For example, do not abuse the liver by taking alcohol, and do not abuse the lungs by smoking. So by minimizing the entry of what is harmful and avoiding overuse, misuse, and abuse of different parts of the body, one can minimize the extent to which the body is challenged. So we couple this with the improving the capacity of the body to meet challenges, and we improve our chances enormously of staying healthy. So this is one way of looking at health and disease. Now let's look at the Ayurvedic view of health. One of the most often quoted shlokas from Shushruta Samhita is Samadosha Samagnischa Samadhatu Malah Kriya Prasanatmendriya Mana Swastha iti Abhidhiyate. Samadosha, that is balanced doshas or humors of the body. Samagnischa, that is Samagni. Agni is the digestive fire, the digestive capacity of the body. So digestive capacity, which is in a normal, balanced state. Samadhatu, dhatu is tissues. Different tissues of the body being balanced, being in a good shape. And this is generally written along with Malahakriya. Samadhatu Malahakriya. The Sama applies to also to the Malahakriya. Malahakriya is, Mala is what is dirty. That is excretory products. So proper normal excretion of the waste products like urine and feces. So Samadosha, Samagnischa, Samadhatu, Malahakriya, Prasanatmendriya Mana. That is, all these three should be prasanna. Atma prasanna, soul happy, and Indriya is sensory organs. And in Ayurvedic literature, sensory organs doesn't just mean the five senses, eyes, ears, and nose, and so on. It includes a large number of other senses as well as the motor organs, what we call in modern science motor organs, that is those which act like say the muscles and glands. So that way essentially it covers the whole body. So we can say a happy soul in a happy body, and mana is mind. So a happy soul in a happy body and happy mind. So one who has all these characteristics, that is, his humors are in balance, his digestive fire is good, his tissues are in a good shape, his excretory products are being eliminated normally, and who is happy in his soul, body, and mind. Swastha iti abhidhiyate. Such a person is called healthy. Such a person is said to be in good health. Now, this, as you can see, looks at health in a much more holistic manner than the modern science till recently tended to do. Now it is expanding in the same direction, but all the same, this is traditional knowledge of several thousand years old, at least 5,000 years old, because we have the early beginnings of this knowledge in one of the Vedas, the Atharva Veda. We have Ayurveda as one of the Upavedas of Atharva Veda. But modern science is once again, modern medicine is moving in that same direction. But all the same, you can see this is a very holistic way, but all the same, it is a view of a system of medicine. And therefore, it leaves behind a few questions unanswered, because basically looking at health as bodily health. So two questions which can be raised is, can the body and mind be happy without a connection with the soul? When it says prasanatma indriya mana, it's talking of the happiness of the soul, the body, and the mind. But then the soul is always at peace, and the mind, that is the feeling and the thinking parts of the mind, become happy only when they are connected to the soul. That it does not talk about. It just says this, along with all the other bodily things like the humors being in balance, and the excretory products being taken care of properly, and the tissues being in normal shape, and so on and so forth. So it talks about all those bodily processes, and this about the mind and the soul, and all of them put together. If they are okay, then the person is healthy. But then it doesn't talk about the cause-effect relationship. Does this happiness lead to good health, or does good health lead to happiness? One can say that, well, happiness leads to good health, or one can also say that only if the health is good, a person will be happy. So, which is the cause, which is the effect, doesn't talk about, just says who will be called happy, who is the person who is called healthy, without going into the cause-effect relationship. Now, that actually the spiritual view of health does. And just for recapitulation, the spiritual view of the individual is that the body, the emotional part of the being, and the intellect, the emotions and the intellect together being the body and the mind are what is on the surface, but then behind it, supporting it, is the soul, and the soul has a dynamic component, the psychic being, which provides guidance, which provides intuitive knowledge, and which helps us transcend the normal capacities of the body and the mind. So all these things the psychic being does. So we have this divine essence, but then normally there is a barrier which makes us function more at the level of the body and the mind. And the prime minister sort of appointed by the soul, which may be treated as the president, is the ego. And it's basically the ego maintaining some sort of a harmonious relationship with the body, mind, and intellect, which itself becomes difficult because the body, mind, and intellect are themselves at war with each other. The body might be lazy, but the person might have a strong passion to do something. Or the person, body might be in good shape, but the person might feel lazy. So it's just a feeling, don't feel like going for a walk. The body is strong enough to go for a walk. Or the intellect says that smoking is bad, but the emotional part of the being says, I enjoy it. And the poor body is ignored. The body doesn't respond to it well, but then that is ignored. So these members of the different parts of the being are themselves at war with each other. On top of that, they are catering to the demands, the unending demands of the ego. And the result is that we are in a state of perpetual disharmony. And it is this disharmony that is the basic cause of disease from the spiritual point of view. So what is the solution? The solution is that although there's a barrier, that barrier can be weakened and can eventually disappear. And that is when the soul can illumine the functions of the body, the emotional part of the being, and intellect. And the soul being perfect, when that illumines the action of these surface parts of the being, there is no war between them because they're all responding to the wisest voice available in the body. And that is, what that bhajan which you heard in the beginning was about, that my Chetana becoming yours, dissolving in yours, and the divine, the consciousness of the divine resides within us, in our soul. So when that is the consciousness into which the consciousness of the body, mind, and intellect dissolves, so that they behave as one unit, that is when we are in that harmony, which is healthy. Of course, this is not a one-time event; it's a process. But every step in that process takes us a little bit closer to that ultimate harmony, and has commensurate benefits in the form of byproducts. As that barrier becomes weaker, we start getting also healthier and happier. Why happier? Because then we are doing the type of things that the soul wants us to do. And the soul wants us to act out of love, out of a sense of love, which inspires a sense of oneness. And therefore, we start doing what I was talking about some exceptional cancer patients do. We habitually start becoming more and more loving, caring, and sharing. So we become good people. When we become good people, we also become happy people, because every act of giving brings joy. Every right thing brings us joy. You might in fact experienced, we said that disease is absence of ease. When you're not at ease, the person has a disease, irrespective of whether an organ is diseased or not. You might have felt that when you do something which you know is wrong, but out of some compulsion you do it, or say you are forced to tell a lie because of these compulsions of the situation, you find that suddenly your whole body starts feeling a little weaker. On the other hand, when you do something courageous, even if it involves a loss or a risk, at the end of it, you feel very good and the body also feels stronger. So in fact, there's a body's mind and soul continuum. And every time we break that barrier, act out of love, resort to truth and what is right, we find that the body feels happy and the body feels, the mind feels happy and the body feels strong. So you find that that relationship is not only long term, one can feel it even in short term through single acts of what is right and wrong, what is good and bad, what is true and false. So you find that there's the relationship between feeling easy and getting connected to the soul. So it is this way that the spiritual point of view or the spiritual worldview looks at health. In other words, the spiritual view of health is that we are healthy when the body and the mind are anchored to the soul. Out of these, the most important part to handle is the emotional part of the being, because we are primarily ruled by the emotions. If the emotions are got anchored to the soul, the intellect easily finds reasons to justify what the mind wants to do. And if the mind and the intellect together, because they are now anchored to the soul, have decided to do something right, the poor body acts like a docile instrument and just does it. So the body and the mind, when they're anchored to the soul, we are in good health. And the anchoring not only keeps us in good health, it also changes human nature, which means it makes us more loving, caring, and sharing. Now, this takes us to a question which Victor Hugo raised in his novel, La Miserable, The Miserable Ones. Are we happy because we are good, or are we good because we are happy? Now, that is an interesting question, but then the timeless verdict has been that we are happy because we are good. It's not that only when we are happy, we can afford to be good. That's not really true. We are happy because we are good. So true happiness, lasting happiness, happiness which we call joy rather than ordinary happiness, comes from being good, which means by doing what is right, by being good persons. And that just reminds me of one beautiful sort of way of saying what is a good person. In the Sikh tradition, there are three small sentences, two words each. Kiratakar, Naam Jap, Vandachak. Kiratakar, that is, do the right actions, which means do the type of actions which would help somebody. Naam Jap, chant the name of the Lord, which means remain aware of the divine. Because if you're chanting the name, not mechanically, you become more and more constantly aware of the presence, and his presence, being aware of that presence, will make us, help us be good people, because we are aware of that somebody is watching. So Kiratkar, Naam Jap, Vandachak. Vandachak means divide, distribute, share, and then eat or consume. So whatever you consume, include food or anything else, don't do it alone, share it. So these three things sort of basically, and that is what makes us happy. Each one of these three, doing the work for the divine, chanting the name of the divine, and sharing what we have makes us happy. So being good makes us happy. We are happy because we are good, not the other way around. One can twist this question a bit and ask, are we healthy because we are happy, or are we happy because we are healthy? So once again, you would have guessed what the right answer is, because we have talked about it indirectly in many ways. We are healthy because we are happy. It's not the other way around. It's not that it's only if we are in good health, we'll be happy. Because you've seen happy people with half a dozen maladies, they can still be happy, whereas a person without any illness may also be unhappy. Without any physically demonstrable illness may also be unhappy. So unhappy, at least sort of in the new normal sense of the term. So we are healthy because we are happy. And how can we become happy? We can be happy when the body and the mind are anchored to the soul. That leads us to a life which is filled with love, joy, and peace. And joy and peace are the highest version of happiness. They can be called a state of bliss. That is what keeps us healthy, bliss or ananda. So in short, the right sequence is, if we are good, we'll be happy. And if we are happy, we'll be healthy. Whereas sometimes, there's a tendency to look at backward, get obsessed with the bodily health and say that, well, I'm miserable because I'm unhealthy. When I'll be healthy, I'll be happy. And when I'll be happy, then I can afford to be good. That is not the right sequence from the spiritual point of view. The right sequence is, if we are good, we'll be happy. And if we are happy, we'll be healthy. So our main task is to be good, lead a life which is in keeping with the spiritual worldview. Happiness will be a byproduct, and another byproduct or consequence of this happiness will be good health. Now let's see, what do doctors and nurses generally do when a patient goes to them? Or at least they should be doing this. And I'm talking in terms of allopathy, the system in which I've been educated. One of the first things that the doctors and the nurses should do is to reassure the patient, you'll be all right. And this reassurance is not a hollow reassurance. It's not just a courtesy. It is based on their knowledge of homeostatic mechanisms. They know that the body has a mechanism for dealing with challenges. And these mechanisms are a variation on the normal homeostatic mechanisms of the healthy body. And they will be pressed into service in a disease. And therefore, this person will be all right. And therefore, this reassurance is based on knowledge. Firm knowledge, grounded in the very basics of the functioning of the body, that the body stays in good health when there's homeostasis, and when homeostasis has been deranged, we have mechanisms for restoring homeostasis. So reassure the patient. And if you can reassure the patient, you can give the patient hope that you will be all right. And therefore, hope should never be taken away from a patient by telling the patient that, well, you have cancer, and therefore, since the average person with your type of cancer lives for 2 years, you'll probably die in 2 years. That is taking away hope from the person. Because it's not speaking the truth. The doctor sometimes feels that I'm speaking the truth by telling the person the right statistics. But actually, it is not, an individual is not a piece of statistics. What the doctor is ignoring is that there are many people, at least some exceptional patients, who have defied the statistics, and this person may be one of them, who will end up defying the statistics and survive much longer than the average patient who lives only 2 years. So don't take away hope from the person. Tell him that nobody can say how long you will live. There are people who have fought the disease successfully, who have survived and overcome the disease. So you may be one of them. So that would give the person hope. How he can be one of those exceptional people, that comes later. That can be done through counseling if this doesn't come naturally to those person. But hope should not be taken away. Then take away anxiety and fear. The person who comes with a disease often has this anxiety and fear. When you give this reassurance and hope, this anxiety and fear should disappear. Not tell the patient, thank God you have come in the right time. Through the such and such tests, we have found out an abnormality, which in the next few years could have led to such and such disease, and you would have died, and so on and so forth. Thank God you came right in time, and therefore now if you start taking this drug for the rest of your life, or if you undergo this particular surgery, then you will be all right. Now, all that does not really take away the anxiety and fear of the patient. So take away the anxiety and fear of the patient. Then tell the patient not to be impatient. Why? Because the doctor knows that there are homeostatic mechanisms which will take care of it. But he also knows it will take time. If it is skin that is burnt, it will take 2 weeks to become completely normal. If it is a bone that is fractured, then it may take 3 months to get all right. And if it is a tendon that is ruptured, it will be quite all right in an unpredictable time, maybe 3 months, maybe 6 months. But on the whole, the patient will keep getting better. But all the same, it will take a much longer time than even the fractured bone. So the doctor, also based on his knowledge, can tell the patient how much patience to have. Then the doctor or the nurse can assist the body's healing mechanisms. There are self-healing mechanisms of the body which the doctor has some knowledge of, and he can help them, assist them. For example, in an inflamed part of the body, painful part of the body, if there is increased blood flow, it can accelerate repair, it can wash away some substances which are causing pain, and increasing this blood flow can be done through hot fermentation. Or if a person has an infection and we have the right antibiotic available, the antibiotic can help the immune mechanisms of the body by reducing the bacterial load. Just as surgery in cancer reduces the tumor load, an antibiotic can reduce the bacterial load in the body. And once that has been done, it will become easier for the immune mechanisms of the body to take care of this infection. So you can be given the right type of antibiotics, but one should remember that the very last germ will be eliminated from the body, not by antibiotics, but by the immune system of the body. And that is why when the person's immune system is compromised, say in a disease like AIDS, of course, these days there is some sort of treatment available also for AIDS, but before that became available, and the person kept getting repeated infections because of depressed immunity, antibiotics were given, but no amount of antibiotics, even the newest generation antibiotics, could make the person live very long. Because the very last germ has to be eliminated from the body only by the immune system of the body, not by antibiotics. So antibiotics are only assisting the body's healing mechanisms, assisting the body's immune system. That's what the antibiotics are doing. Then another thing that doctors and nurses do is to compensate for deficiencies in the body. There may be a dietary deficiency, say there may be an iron deficiency anemia, give iron. Or there may be an endocrine deficiency. The thyroid is not secreting enough hormone, give thyroxine by a pill. The person is not secreting enough insulin, give insulin or something which can work like insulin. So we compensate for deficiencies in the body. And another thing which one can do is to replace losses. The person has lost a large amount of fluid and salts as a result of diarrhea or vomiting or both. We replace those. So these are some of the things which a doctor or nurse can do. And this happens in allopathy. And you can see that none of these is working against nature. There's a common misconception. Allopathy is bad because it works against nature. Allopathy does not work against nature. It works in cooperation with nature. It helps nature. It does not work against nature. No system of medicine can afford to work against nature. So doctors and nurses in allopathy work with nature, not against it. No system of medicine can, in fact, afford to work against nature. So in that sense, every system is a naturopathy. Now here is some suggested reading. This is a book that has been around for now more than 30 years. The latest edition is the 2018 edition, The Human Machine, How to Prevent Breakdowns. It is addressed to the general public. And the 2018 edition is available in the bookshop of the ashram. If it is not, it can be made available easily. And if you are not in Delhi, you can't visit the ashram. If you inform us by email, it can be sent to you by courier. This is for the general public. Those of you who have some medical knowledge and want something more, there are two other books. Fundamentals of Physiology, which was written initially for nursing students, but then it has been found very useful also by medical students. So now we say it's for students of medicine, nursing, and allied subjects. Fundamentals of Physiology, it's about 400 pages. And Understanding Medical Physiology, which is about 1,000 pages. This is for both medical students, but it is being used more by teachers than students. So these are the two books, both published by J.P. Brothers, who are among the more prominent medical publishers in India. And they have an international presence. They have made available these books as e-books. If you want a hard copy, you can probably get it direct from the publishers. They will courier it to you. If you have any difficulty, you can let us know. And then something very welcome has started happening in the world. Just as you have a lot of information available completely free on Wikipedia, from the same group, now you have wiki books available. And they are available to anybody completely free of charge. There's a book on anatomy, there's a book on physiology. I haven't read them, but I'm reasonably sure they'll be good quality books. And they are developing more and more books on health sciences. These are the links that you have available here. They are making more and more. So this sort of health science books is a work in progress. And then there's this wonderful person, Dr. John Campbell, who is a British nurse to start with. His basic qualification is nursing, but he's done a PhD, and he has written books, and he's also a very successful YouTuber. And in fact, it was during the COVID crisis that he came up with a large number of videos supported by data, and they got millions of views. So you'll easily discover him on the net. But then he has also made available at least 2 books. One is Notes for Nurses, Physiology Notes for Nurses, and this one is Pathophysiology Notes for Nurses. And these are books, again, which I'm sure, having heard a few of his videos, I can say will be very good books. So a lot of material available on the net. This is a picture postcard view of Sri Aurobindo Ashram, Delhi branch, where I stay and work. And if you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to drop an email to us on yes@yesspirituality. In Yes Spirituality, the same S serves for yes as well as spirituality.com. And gratitude to the Master and the Mother for making this event possible. And thank you all for being there.
If anybody has any questions, they can unmute and ask, or maybe write in the chat box.
Hello, I have a question.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you for the class. And I want to know if the body can, how can adapt the body in the electromagnetic environment which we are nowadays, with this kind of influences with Wi-Fi and you know, this high frequencies environment which is increased more and more, and how our body can adapt it so fast.
That's a very good question. Life did not evolve under the type of conditions that we have now, under this type of an atmosphere full of all these electromagnetic waves. But certainly it speaks of the resilience of the body, that in spite of having been exposed to it for a few decades now, nothing very dramatic has happened. So that the cell phone companies can still keep coming up with evidence that nothing goes wrong with it. And of course, it is impossible to prove anything negative with certainty in science. So it may be reasonably certain that nothing very dramatic happens, nothing happens on a very large scale. And one may conclude from that, if there is a motive behind it, as in the case of, obviously in the case of cell phone companies, that nothing happens as a result of it. But it's impossible to prove that nothing subtle is happening, nothing will happen over long periods of time. So children who are getting exposed early in life to it, when their body is still and mind is still developing, whether nothing will go wrong with them. Now, these are all things which are new. The life did not evolve under these conditions. Human did not live under these conditions till the last few decades. And therefore, how the body is responding to it, whether the body is actually adapting completely 100% successfully, or some subtle long-term negative effects will be there. These are subjects for further research.
But you know, who are making the proof are the same which have the benefits of this business, and then it's difficult to be confident with the science in this case, because the science and the business are in the same side of the play game, and there is evidence about the exposure of men of the radiation is very harmful and brings problems like cancer and all of this kind of disease. And the number of cancer patients are increased in the last couple of years. We are in our country, the number of deaths are increased, and the process of cancer are so faster than never before. This is our proof, but who are showing the data depends of the government, and the government have a lot of benefits with this technology increase and this electromagnetic communication, which looks like the consumers wants more and more fast communication. I think it's a strange evolution we are experiencing now.
That's part of a broader phenomenon of the dilution of the quality of science. Gone are the days when a person who was passionately involved in finding out something new went to his garage, tinkered with a few things, improvised his apparatus, and found out something new. Research has become, by and large, expensive, and therefore, money has started influencing the research as well as the way the research findings will be projected. That's a part of that larger phenomenon. And the person who thinks that his voice is the right voice and the saner voice is not influenced by these motives does not have the same money power, doesn't have the same power of propaganda, and therefore will always be at a disadvantage. However, the voice of truth has a power of its own and will eventually prevail. But then one also has to accept the fact that just as the type of data that is being put forth by those who benefit from it, because they are the ones who benefit from the electromagnetic radiations, which have become a part of our environment, those who are benefiting from it, they are biased. Those who are saying that it is very harmful are also biased because they have an inherent sort of bent of mind which tends to resist change, which tends to resist anything new, and they feel that anything new and untried is likely to be harmful. You said that it is increasing cancer, but then there can be half a dozen other reasons which can be cited, which may be also responsible for this. The way our diet has changed, the way the environmental pollution with respect to other pollutants other than electromagnetic radiation has changed, the way the mental stress has increased. So one can come up with half a dozen other reasons easily, which could be responsible for it. So when we point out one or the other, each person is reflecting his own bias, what he thinks is most likely to be responsible for what is happening. So that bias which we also have, although we are not benefiting from this bias materially, that in spite of not benefiting materially, we can't say that therefore the bias is not there.
There is a question in the chat box. My body's temperature balancing mechanism doesn't seem to be working fine. I get headaches when it is too hot, and even with little cold, my hands and feet freeze. In winters, my efficiency goes drastically down. Are there specific corrective measures?
Well, you seem to have learned quite a bit from this short session. That is all right, obvious. Yes, we have our weak points, and one of the weak points in your body may be that the temperature regulatory mechanisms are not as good as they are in the average healthy person. So what is the treatment? To assist the body's mechanisms, which means use more woolens than most people do in winters, and be under a little cooler climate, avoid exposing yourself to the sun in summers, because even if there's no air conditioning, I found that there can be a difference of about 10 degrees between outside and inside. When the outside temperature is about 45 degrees centigrade, in a room it is barely above 35. So that itself is a big help. And on top of that, if we use a fan, which helps in evaporation of the sweat, that can help further. So just not going out in the sun, avoiding going out in the sun can make a difference. So one has to assist nature. And if there are mechanisms, there is a way of increasing the capacity of the body. One can go for general measures which improve health in general, which we talked about, diet, exercise, sleep, mental stress, and so on. One can take to those, or if there are more specific measures, then probably there may be something available in ancient systems like Ayurveda.
The next question is, what leads to congenital health issues such as congenital heart issue, is the health of the mother affecting the health of the fetus?
That's again a very good question and impossible to sort of say yes or no to it, just like the question on electromagnetic radiations. Obviously, something has gone wrong with the normal mechanism of development in the uterus. And whether it is just an accident, it somehow happened, which itself should not be surprising, because the surprising thing is that most of the time such derangements do not happen. If you look at the development of the heart, forget, starting with a single cell and that taking up the shape of the whole organism. The development of the heart itself from a single tube and developing that four-chambered heart with complete blood-tight, airtight partitions and the valves at the right place, that itself is a big surprise. And the surprising thing is that most people have that in a perfect shape when they are born. Most babies have that. But having said that, yes, there are again suspicions that some of the physical as well as psychological factors in the mother might increase the possibility of some congenital abnormalities, say particularly like hemangiomas, etc. So some of those suspicions are there. Sometimes malnutrition in the mother could increase the possibility of some of these, particularly folate deficiency. And in some cases, of course, that is a classical knowledge, infections like German measles, that can increase the possibility of congenital abnormalities. So what experiences the mother goes through, whether it's disease and psychological experiences, the types of thoughts and feelings she has, all these could have some effect on the baby, and that effect may not be just very subtle. It could be obvious in terms of a structural defect. That is certainly possible. It's not impossible, but it's very difficult to prove it.
All right, everyone. This brings us to the end of our class. Thank you once again for joining. Tomorrow we will have the session on the physiology of blood. Today we end with a moment of silence.